Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. Most of us know what we should do to be healthier. Eat better, move more, sleep well. The real challenge? Actually following through. On today's show, I talked to behavioral psychologist Amantha Imber, author of The Health Habit, who argues that the missing piece in most health advice isn't more information, it's learning how to bridge the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. Amantha first outlines 4 habit hijackers that sabotage your best laid plans and shares practical, research-backed tactics to overcome each one. We then dive into some specific health habits that will give you a lot of transformative bang for your buck. We discuss how restricting your sleep can help you sleep better, the truth about the popular 10,000 steps a day recommendation, the underrated power of an after-dinner walk, and more. After the show's over, check out our show notes at aom.is/healthhabit. All right, Amantha Imber, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
So you wrote a book called The Health Habit. You are a behavioral psychologist. I'm curious, how did you think about using your behavior psychology to help people establish and maintain healthy habits? Because there's a lot of books out there about eating right, exercising. What did you think you bring to the table as a behavioral psychologist as to the discussion about health?
Well, it was actually a bit of an aha moment. I was in my local bookshop. I was under a little bit of pressure from my publisher at Penguin to put in a proposal for my next book. And I'm a huge consumer of health and well-being kind of books, and I'm a massive experimenter on myself. And it just kind of occurred to me as I was browsing through the many titles that exist in any bookshop around how to improve your health, that if any of them actually worked in the sense that you read the techniques and you changed your behavior and suddenly you were healthier and those new habits stuck for life, then there would be no market for health books. And I thought the missing thing from all these health books is actually the psychology around how do you make all this great health advice stick. And so the idea for The Health Habit was taking a lot of science-backed, evidence-backed strategies for how can we improve our sleep, our nutrition, the way that we move or exercise, but actually give people the psychological tricks to make those great habits stick for good.
Yeah, I'm sure if there's any doctors listening who are family practitioners, they've probably seen this. You know, they can tell their patients, well, you need to quit smoking, you need to start eating right, you need to start exercising, and then the patient doesn't do it. Information is not enough. You have to be sort of a psychologist to help your patients implement these things you're telling them that they know they need to do.
That's exactly right. I mean, I don't think there's too many people listening that would be thinking, oh, is exercise really good for me? Of course, exercise is good for us. We all know that. Yet gym memberships go completely unused every month because there's a real gap between knowing something and actually doing the thing.
What keeps people from following through on their health goals? They say, I'm going to start running, I'm going to start weight training, I'm going to start eating right, but then they don't do it. What are the big obstacles there? I mean, is it just misguided ideas about habits or behavior change? What do you think is going on?
Well, when I was researching for The Health Habit, I identified that there were 4 main barriers that get in the way for a lot of people. I call them hijackers. And very briefly, there are 4 of them. The first one is motivational. So where you kind of feel like you have to do the thing, but you don't really want to do the thing. So there's a motivational barrier at play. The second are relational barriers, where perhaps the social norms in your life are making it harder for you to do the thing that you want to do. Let's say you're trying to eat more healthy, but you live in a household where everyone loves junk food. There's going to be a relational barrier at play. The third are environmental hijackers. This is where the physical or digital environment that you're living and working within is just not setting you up for success. And the fourth one are cognitive hijackers, where you're just feeling really stressed or exhausted or overwhelmed. And when we feel that way mentally, it's really hard to change our behavior.
Do different people get hung up on the different hijackers?
Well, often at different times in our life and for different habits that we're trying to change, there might be a different hijacker in the way. Like, so for example, let's take the idea of someone wanting to quit sugar. And a really common barrier there are environmental barriers, where if you're like a lot of people, you've probably got sugary snacks in your pantry, perhaps at eye level, perhaps in a transparent container. And if that's your home environment, there's a massive environmental hijacker at play. Like if, the sugary treats or snacks are within plain sight whenever you walk into your pantry. So that's one example. Another example around, say, motivational hijackers is that most people know they have to exercise or should exercise, but they don't really love it. And so there's often for people a big motivational barrier at play there.
Whenever someone's looking at, okay, what's preventing me from doing the thing I want to do, whether it's eating right or exercising or getting better sleep, is there a way to figure out which hijacker is the obstacle?
There is. I designed a really simple survey. It's in the Health Habit book, but I'll also give you a link that you can pop in the show notes for anyone to just, for free, just assess what is the biggest hijacker getting in the way of you successfully making a change to your behavior right now.
Okay, well, we'll link to that, and that'll be a great thing that our listeners can do. So you have these different hijackers, but you provide ways to overcome these habit hijackers. Let's talk about motivational hijackers. What are some tactics that people can use to overcome motivational hijackers? So let's say there's this thing they want to do, they just don't feel motivated to do it. What are some research-backed tips that they can start implementing to maybe boost their motivation a little bit?
Okay, so my favorite one, and this is the one that I personally use most often, is temptation bundling. So this is how it works, and an example of the science that it comes from. So there was one particular study, and there's been many studies done on temptation bundling that looked at how could we get people to exercise more often. So they recruited a couple of hundred people at a university campus, and they looked at their exercise behavior. So specifically, how often did they visit the gym on campus for 10 weeks? And people were split into 3 different groups. So there was one group that was given an iPod, which I know really dates this study. It was done over 10 years ago. And they were given an iPod, and it was preloaded with top-ranking audiobooks. And these participants were told, use this iPod, but only when you're at the gym. Only use it when you're exercising and enjoy these brilliant audiobooks. The second group were given the same iPod, same audiobooks, and they were told, look, listen to it when you exercise, but also just enjoy it for the next 10 weeks whenever you want to listen to an audiobook. And then the third group were given $25. And that was it, which is actually quite a lot of money for these university studies, but no iPod. What the researchers found is that the people that were in group one, the people that were given the iPod and said, only listen to these audiobooks when you're doing exercise, went to the gym over 50% more often than the cash group, which was the control group. The second group that had the iPod but listened to it whenever they wanted, they also went to the gym more often. It was about sort of 25-30% more often, but not as frequently as the group that only listen to the iPod when they were exercising. So this is an example of temptation bundling, where you're pairing the undesirable activity of exercising with something that is inherently pleasurable, in this case, some great audiobooks. And so, for example, how I use this technique in my life is I actually love weight training. I have no motivational issues there, but I do have a motivational problem when it comes to cardio exercise. So I own a very expensive exercise bike, and I actually hate using it. And so a few years ago, I created a rule for myself where one of my guilty pleasures is watching The Bachelor, which I feel like it's in its like 200th season now or something. But I am a sucker for bitchiness on TV. And I feel, quite guilty just sitting on the couch and watching The Bachelor. So what I did is I created a rule for myself, and I said, I'm only allowed to watch The Bachelor when I'm on the exercise bike. And it completely changed my relationship with riding on the exercise bike. It also meant that I get through seasons pretty slowly and I read all the spoilers, but that's okay. I still love the show. So temptation bundling, highly recommend it if there's a motivational barrier at play.
I'm the same as you. I have no problem. I love weightlifting. It's my passion. I've done it for years. Cardio is just a chore.
Yeah.
And so for me, what I've done with the temptation bundling is I watch movies while I'm doing the treadmill. Like I'm just walking at an incline on the treadmill. And it's been awesome because I've had this goal for a long time to become a cinephile. Like I want to watch the Criterion Collection, like Seven Samurai and Casablanca, but just didn't have time for it. So I thought, oh, I can do that while I'm doing cardio. And so, yeah, I just queue up a movie and I'm on the treadmill for an hour. And I've gotten through a lot of the Criterion Collection just by doing some temptation bundling.
I love that. Great example.
One tactic that you highlight on how to overcome motivational hijackers is, and I've never heard of this one, it's question-powered self-talk. What is that?
Yes. So often when we are trying to do the thing, like let's just, say on the exercise example, okay, I need to exercise today. It's not particularly motivating when we tell ourselves, okay, I need to exercise today. What psychologists have found is if we can actually change that into a question, we're much more likely to do things. So instead of going, I need to exercise today, saying to yourself or asking yourself, will I exercise today, makes us significantly more likely to do exercise. So what our brain is doing when we're asking ourselves a question as opposed to giving it a statement is we're tricking ourselves into feeling like we have choice, like we have autonomy over the decision. And when we feel like we've got choice, we're far more motivated to do the thing. So when we ask ourselves, well, will I exercise today? We think, will I? I've got a choice in the matter. And then, because we're trying to be good and trying to do the thing, we will be much more likely to go, yes, I will exercise today.
That's really interesting. Okay, I like that. And I've seen that in my own life. There's been times where I've used digital nudges to get me to do certain things, like get up to walk. With your Apple Watch, you can set it if you've been, sedentary for a certain amount of time. It'll say, time to get up for a walk. And I'm like, you're annoying. Get out of here. But I imagine if it just said, hey, would you like to get up? I'd be like, oh, you know what? Do I want to get up? Yeah, maybe I do want to get up because it would give you that sense of autonomy.
Yes.
So I really like that idea of turning your self-talk into a question. Any other things that you can do to overcome motivational hijackers?
Yeah, look, there's quite a few in the book. One that I have found to be very effective is fining yourself. And what I mean by that is, and look, I'll give an example actually from someone on my team at work who used this. So this particular teammate, she is a crazy mad fan of Leeds. So she follows the football in the UK. And she'd set herself the goal of she wanted to read one nonfiction book for 6 months, every week, a new one every week, which is a pretty impressive goal. And she declared to the team that if she did not hit this goal, she was going to donate, I think, like $100 or something to Manchester United, i.e. the enemy. And this kept her motivated. I think she also had said she was going to post a picture of herself on social media wearing a Manchester jersey, which of course is just a disgusting thing to do if you happen to go for Leeds. So finding yourself and giving that money to somewhere that you absolutely hate can be very, very motivating to stick to a behavior.
Let's talk about relational hijackers. What are some tactics that are research-backed that can help us overcome those relational hijackers? So that's basically our social environment is getting in the way of us accomplishing or fulfilling our health habit goals.
That's right. And, I would say if you're listening to this and you feel like you're someone that's maybe a bit of a people pleaser, there's a good chance that there might be a relational hijacker at play. And so we can actually use those people pleasing tendencies to our advantage. And one of the most effective things that we can do is to make a public pledge. So this might be, on a group WhatsApp group to say, I am going to, eliminate all unhealthy snacks from my diet for the next 4 weeks, or I am going to, do the Couch to 5K program for the next 8 weeks. And if you announce your goal publicly, so it could just be to your friends and family, it could be on social media, just somewhere public, you're much more likely to actually stick to that goal because you don't want to let other people down and you don't want to look like an idiot. So it's really, utilizing, that tendency that you feel quite accountable to the people around you.
Yeah, I think it's also useful too, that public declaration saying, hey, you look, I have this goal. I want to eat better, or I want to exercise. And you tell this to your family. And you can say, I want you to hold me accountable. If you see me, going for a fourth serving of mashed potatoes, like, hey, can you give me the nudge? Like, hey, Dad, do you really don't tell them, Dad, don't eat the mashed potatoes. Like, Dad, do you really want to eat those mashed potatoes? Because you want to do the self-talk, the will, give them some autonomy.
Yeah, exactly.
What about environmental hijackers? What are some tactics to overcome those?
So I would say if you don't know where to start, or if you're thinking, these all sound like barriers, environmental hijackers and overcoming those tend to be some of the most powerful strategies. So one of the biggest things that you can do is have a think about the behavior that you're trying to change, and think about what in your environment, like what is your environment setting you up to be the default choice? So let me give you an example. A lot of people have the goal to improve their sleep. They want to stop scrolling on their phone before bed. Very common behavior goal. And if your phone charger is on your bedside table, I can tell you right now that your environment is setting you up to fail. It is very hard to simply just rely on willpower to say to yourself, okay, even though my phone is within arm's reach before I go to bed, I'm just not going to scroll on it. I'm going to do something else, or maybe I'll just go straight to sleep. Really, really hard. So what you want to do in that situation is you want to disrupt the default choice, because the default choice in that environment is to pick up your phone and scroll before bed. So to disrupt that default, you might want to, for example, take your phone charger and put it in a completely different room. Put it in the corridor, put it in the kitchen, and instead charge your phone there, because it is no longer the default option to go, I'm going to scroll on my phone before I go to bed, because your phone is not near your bed.
I love that. I think you can do that with nutrition. If you're trying to eat better, don't buy junk food. Don't keep it in the house. And instead buy lots of healthy options and make sure it's visible.
100%. And look, if you say have kids that demand the sugary treats or whatever, or maybe you've got a spouse that is refusing to give up sugar, for example, what you can do to disrupt the default is, instead of, say, having those treats at eye level in the fridge or in the pantry and in transparent containers, you can put them in opaque containers. You can put them out of arm's reach. So maybe you have to get a step ladder to reach those snacks, or maybe just put them right at the bottom of your pantry or fridge, where you're just not going to see them every time you're in those locations.
A big thing that I've done to overcome environmental hijackers for exercising that's paid off big time for me is just having a home gym. Because it just makes it so easy. I can just walk down to my garage and I can exercise. And you don't even have to have like a whole home gym. It could be you got a kettlebell, or you have some sort of pull-up bar, and it's just there in your house, and you remove all that friction from exercise. You don't have to, okay, I got to get in the car, drive to the gym, work out, drive back. You can just do it.
Yes, and friction is really important, because when you're trying to do more of a behavior, if you can reduce the friction that is involved in doing that good behavior, like rather than having to drive to a gym, it's right in your home. And I did the very same thing and have had a home gym set up, since 2020, and it's easy. You can also, when you're trying to not do a behavior or try to eliminate a behavior, is you can put friction in the way. But I do love the idea of removing friction. Something that I have heard a lot of people do successfully that are trying to do more exercise is to sleep in their gym clothes. Because when you wake up, there is no excuse not to exercise, because you are literally dressed for the gym. I also applied this strategy to parenting many years ago when my daughter was in the earlier years of primary school. And, for those that have young kids, you will know that sometimes getting them dressed into their school uniform takes a lot of time and is a massive battle that most of us don't have the patience for in the morning. So I started dressing my daughter to go to bed in her school uniform. So she would wake up and she would be dressed and ready to go. And yes, it would have some creases, but hey, who cares?
All right, so environmental, it sounds like look for friction points and see if you can reduce them. That'll go a long way. Or if you don't want to do something, increase the friction. Let's talk about cognitive hijackers. What are some research-backed tactics to overcome those?
Well, probably my favorite one here is the power of a particular word, and that word is don't. So this comes from some research that was led by Professor Vanessa Patrick. And what she did, she got a group of people into the lab under the guise of, she was just there to teach them some strategies to make healthier choices with their eating. And she divided people into two groups. One group were taught to say, when presented with an unhealthy temptation like chocolate, they were taught to say, I don't eat chocolate. And a second group were taught to say, I can't eat chocolate. So very similar strategies, literally just changing two letters, can't versus don't. Then everyone left the lab, but the crux of the experiment actually happened when people were leaving the lab, and they were presented with an option of two different snacks. So one option was a chocolate bar. The second option was a healthy granola bar or muesli bar. And what the researchers found is that those that were taught to say, I don't eat chocolate, were 50% more likely to take the healthy granola bar instead of the chocolate bar, all through just changing one little word in their self-talk. So why that works so well is when we say I can't do something, which is pretty reflective of a lot of people's self-talk, like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, oh, I can't really eat dessert because I'm on a diet, is we just feel a bit restricted and a bit crappy about ourselves. But when we say I don't do the thing, like I don't eat chocolate, I don't eat dessert, I don't have sugar as examples, we actually feel like that is part of my self-identity. And as humans, we want to act in a way that is consistent with how we see ourselves. So for me, I used to be a massive sugar addict, and this strategy had the biggest impact on me quitting sugar. And, it's been over a decade now since I quit sugar as a daily habit.
One tactic you recommend for overcoming cognitive hijackers is using the power of a fresh start to boost your health habit goals. And I think this could be useful because we're coming up on a new year. What is the fresh start tactic?
Yeah, so the fresh start effect is a really handy one. And it suggests that when you pick a date that is like at the start of a new thing. So it might be the start of a year, January 1. It might be the start of a new season, like, the start of spring or fall, or it might be even just the start of a week, like Monday. We are significantly more likely to stick to the habit that we want to do because it literally feels like a fresh start. It's like a new chapter in our book. We don't need to worry or think about all the times that we've failed in the past because it's a fresh start today. So when researchers have looked at people that have tried to kickstart a new habit on, say, a Monday compared to a Thursday, or in the middle of a month versus the first of a month, those that start at the start, if you like, of that month or that week or that season are far more likely to be able to stick to that new behavior.
Another tactic you highlight to overcome cognitive hijackers, I've used this with my own health habits, is giving yourself a hall pass to bend the rules. Tell us about that.
I love this strategy and I use it for myself across several different realms of my life. So we've probably heard of the term hall pass when it comes to, say, marriages and, having a hall pass if, this particular celebrity ever wanted to spend a night with me. But hall passes are really great when it comes to changing our behavior. So there was one particular study that looked at people who were trying to do more steps, do more walking in a day. And all the participants in this study were given the goal of doing 20% more steps than their current month's average. So, so it was a bit of a stretch target. So one group were basically told to walk every day for 30 days and try to hit their goal, 20% more steps every single day. The second group were given 2 hall passes every week for the 4 weeks of the study. So the researchers said, look, hit your goal every day, but we're going to give you 2 hall passes so you can pick 2 days, whenever you want them to be, per week, where you don't need to worry about hitting your steps target. And what the researchers found is that those given the hall pass strategy were actually more likely to hit their daily steps target. And when they had a day where they failed, they were much more able to bounce back. So they were more resilient. So if there's a daily habit that you're trying to create, and I think this is particularly good for people, trying to turn over a new leaf with their eating or dieting or something like that. What typically happens is we're like, okay, I'm starting a diet on Monday. And then by Thursday, we've, binged on like a bunch of things that we're trying to avoid. We have this thing that psychologists call the what the hell effect. And it's like, what the hell? I've broken the diet. I may as well just go back to my normal eating. But hall passes overcome that because we can simply just say, well, Thursday, I decided to take a hall pass and I'm going to get back on, the good behavior regime on Friday.
Yeah, it gets rid of that all or nothing thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. I've used that with my own health habits, like with eating and exercise. Some days I'll have days where I need to train and I'm just not feeling it because I'm tired, I'm stressed out. And I say, okay, I'm not going to do my program session. I'm just going for a walk. And it's not exactly what I wanted to do, but I at least moved my body intentionally. Or when it comes to nutrition, I track my macros. So I try to hit certain protein and carbohydrate and fat targets. But sometimes, you're at a party and there's like pie or cake and you don't want to be the guys like, I'm not eating that and just, I want to enjoy and that food's a way to socialize. So I'm like, okay, I'll have some cake. It doesn't exactly fit my macros. I don't need to have like 3 slices, but I can have a small slice. That's fine. And I'm okay with that. I don't beat myself up because I just had a piece of cake.
I think that's so great. It's also why cheat days are actually really effective, according to science.
We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. And now back to the show. So let's talk about some specific health habits. So we established this framework of how you can use behavioral psychology to overcome habit hijackers. You then have a section in the book where you talk about specific health habits that you picked out that you thought, based on research, would provide the most bang for your buck. So let's see how we can apply this framework to help stick to these different health habits. The first health habits you focus on relate to sleep. You've struggled with insomnia, but now you're a great sleeper. What are some of the health habits that you implemented in your own life to make sleep better for you?
Yeah. Okay. Let me talk about the one that has had by far the biggest impact. So I am someone that has struggled with insomnia during my 20s, during my 30s, and then in my 40s, where I am now, it's pretty much gone. So what happened in my 20s is I was living in Sydney at the time, and every morning I would drive across the Sydney Harbour Bridge to get to work, and it would be early in the morning, and I would always be tired. And one morning, it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, I thought to myself, I wonder if there are people that don't actually feel constantly exhausted like I do. And I thought, well, what a stupid thought. Of course there are people that feel that way. And then I thought, I wonder if I've got a problem because I'm always tired. And so I got to the office that morning and I Googled Sleep Doctor Sydney and I booked myself in to see a sleep doctor. And what sleep doctors typically recommend is to go into their rooms or a hospital and do an overnight sleep test where you're hooked up to about 30 or 40 different electrodes and it's very uncomfortable. And then the doctor says, okay, now sleep. So it's not a fun night, but at least it's a night where, you can get some data on what is going on. So I did that. I felt like I had a terrible night's sleep, but hey, nothing new because most nights were terrible night's sleep. And I went back to see the sleep doctor a couple of weeks later with the results. And, he said, look, the good news is that there's nothing physiologically wrong. You don't have, a sleep disorder. You don't have sleep apnea. But I guess the bad news is that it means that it's psychological and there is no magic pill to fix that. And so what he prescribed, so to speak, was sleep restriction. So he asked me, how many hours do you reckon you're spending in bed right now? And I told him that at the time I was getting into bed at about 9 p.m. and I was getting out of bed at about 7 a.m. And so that's 10 hours in bed, which might seem like a lot of time. But in my sleep-deprived brain, I thought, well, the longer I'm in bed, the better the chance I've got of catching some sleep, which I think is how a lot of insomniacs think. It kind of feels rational, but it's actually not. So the sleep doctor then asked me, how many of those 10 hours do you think that you're actually spending asleep? And I thought about it and I said, I reckon maybe 6 hours. And so he said, okay, what you're going to do now is you are going to limit the time that you are in bed to just 6 hours per night. And so he said, keep your wake time the same. So keep getting up at 7 a.m. because, one of the other habits I talk about in the book is having a consistent rise time or consistent wake time. But he said, you're only now allowed to spend 6 hours per night in bed, which means you're going to go to bed at 1 a.m. And I was in shock because going to bed at 9 p.m. versus 1 a.m., that's a very big change. And I thought, how am I going to stay up so late? But he said, this is really important because we need to retrain your brain to associate bed with sleep as opposed to bed with catastrophizing and ruminating and worrying that you're not getting enough sleep. So for the first few nights, I managed to stay up until 1 a.m. And by the time my head hit the pillow, I was out. And I was managing after a few nights to have a really solid 6 hours of sleep. And then once I was managing to do that for a few nights, the sleep doctor then said you can extend your window by half an hour. So I was allowed to go to bed at 12:30 instead of 1 in the morning. I did that for a few nights until I was sleeping pretty consistently for 6.5 hours and gradually brought back that go to bed time until I was in bed for about 8 hours, which is what I'd estimated at the time was how much sleep I needed. So sleep restriction therapy is generally, with most sleep doctors, when there's a psychological issue, generally the first point of call is what I found, and it is so effective.
Okay, so with sleep restriction, you're only going to be in bed for the amount of time you are actually asleep each night. And you're doing that so that you only associate your bed with sleep. So to start out, you're going to count back the hours you do sleep at night from your wake time, and that's going to be your new bedtime. And that's going to be much later than you're typically going to bed to start. I did something recently. It wasn't exactly sleep restriction, but I was trying to retrain my sleep schedule, and it involved staying up till midnight every night. And it was pretty daunting or demoralizing to make yourself stay up late when you don't want to and you're not used to it, because I love going to bed early. So knowing that it's hard to do, what can we do? What sort of tactics that we talked about earlier can we use to stick to sleep restriction so that you can get the benefit of it?
Yeah. And look, sleep restriction, this is a good one to think about temptation bundling, because you are going to be dreading those hours that you are forcing yourself to stay awake. So try to make those hours fun. Like, don't do something stimulating because that is not going to be helpful in terms of sleep. But you might say, save up episodes of your favorite podcast to listen to in those hours where you're trying to stay awake. Or you might save up episodes of your favorite TV show because, TV watching is a pretty passive activity. So I would recommend that people think about what is something that they can really look forward to make staying awake those extra few hours more doable and maybe even a bit more enjoyable.
Yeah, that's what I did. I started playing video games. I'm not a big video gamer, but I started playing this video game again that I've already played 2 or 3 times. It's called Red Dead Redemption. You're basically a cowboy in the American West. And it can be stimulating because you're a bad guy and you're shooting other bad guys. But I would just go on there to ride my horse in this fictional American West and go hunting for bears. And it was actually really relaxing. And so you mentioned some other things you can do for your sleep. Wake up at the same time. That's a big one. And then also, I think the stuff that people already know, establish a good going to bed routine, practice good sleep hygiene. Set a time where you're okay, I'm going to get off my smartphone, get off Twitter or X, Instagram, and I'll do something a little bit more relaxing.
Yes, those are all really important. And then when we wake up in the morning, one of the most important things to do is to get exposure to daylight, to sunlight. So doing that just resets our circadian rhythms. It resets essentially our body clock, and it makes it easier to fall asleep at night. Research shows that even just getting out for 5 to 10 minutes into natural light and daylight in, the first hour or two after waking can be incredibly effective at resetting our body clock.
So let's talk about habits we can implement to improve or increase the amount of we move during the day. Because you highlight a lot of research about what not only just exercise, but just general movement can do for our health. One health habit you recommend is VILPA. This is an acronym. So VILPA. What is VILPA?
So VILPA stands for Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity. It is a mouthful, but it is incredibly effective, particularly for those that hate exercise or say, I don't have time for exercise. So what VILPA is, and remember, it's lifestyle physical activity. These are just moments that, might be a 1 or 2 minute moment in your day where you're like somehow incorporating quite vigorous physical activity into your day. So, like an example might be if you say catch the bus or the train or subway to work and you're running late and you sprint the final, 400 or 500 meters. That is an example of VILPA. It's not exercise, like you didn't, map out a minute in your day to do this exercise. It was simply just part of your lifestyle for that particular day. Another example is where maybe it's after school, after work, and you're out in the backyard and you're playing chasey with your kids and you're doing some intermittent bursts of running around. Again, it's not exercise that you planned, but it just happens to be in your lifestyle where you're doing, a 1 or 2 minute burst of pretty vigorous physical activity. So what a huge research study found into VILPA, and this is looking at people who had 3 to 4 bouts, if you like, of VILPA, so those 1 to 2 minute intense physical activity moments in their day, were 40% less likely to die early. So, when we look at like all-cause mortality, they basically had dramatically reduced the chances of dying prematurely from diseases that were largely preventable if we can be healthier with our habits. So it's a really great thing to actually deliberately incorporate into your day. Like maybe instead of just randomly, running late to catch transport to your workday, you can just challenge yourself every morning. I'm just going to sprint that final 500 meters to the bus stop, for example. Or every afternoon, I'm actually going to plan a game, with Chasey, with the kids, or when I take the dog for a walk, I'm just going to sprint those last few blocks with the dog to get some VILPA into my day.
One thing that we do in our family is we have this rule. I guess this would be an implementation intention. I think you talk about this in the book, but it's our rule to get some VILPA is if there are stairs, we take the stairs. I got this from Michael Easter. He's an author who writes about health and fitness. And he has this statistic. I don't know if it's true, but it's basically 2% of the population take the stairs if there are stairs. And so we tell our kids and ourselves, all right, McKay's, we're 2%ers. If there are stairs, we're taking the stairs. And you see this a lot at the airport, especially because you got your big giant suitcase and it's so tempting to be like, all right, we're taking the escalator because you just stand there with it's like, nope, you got to get your suitcase, hold it, and you got to go up the stairs. And it's a short little workout. I mean, it is vigorous.
Oh, yeah. It is. Yeah, I love that. Be in the 2% club.
Be in the 2% club. Another habit you recommend for getting some more movement is to get at least 7,500 steps in a day. Why just 7,500? Typically, the number you hear thrown out there is 10,000 steps.
Absolutely. Most people, if they've got a walking goal or a steps goal, it's 10,000 steps a day. And there is absolutely no science behind that number. Where it actually came from is that a company in Japan found that the Japanese symbol for walking looks like the number 10,000, or the symbol for 10,000 looks like a man walking. So they thought, okay, let's create this. I think it was a pedometer that suggests that you should do 10,000 steps a day. And that is how the myth was created. But when there have been meta-analyses conducted around how many steps per day actually reduces the chance of dying early from things like heart disease, what they found is that typically it's about 7,500 to 8,000 steps a day. That is the magic number. So I would love it if listeners just adjust their daily steps goal, make it a little bit lower, 7,500 steps, because there's actually science behind that as opposed to 10,000 steps, which is purely a marketing gimmick.
So any tactics that we've talked about earlier and how you can implement this habit and stick to it?
Yeah, look, I personally love the hall pass strategy for this. And, I think one of the interesting things about the hall pass strategy, as I described, there was a study that actually looked at people who had a steps goal and the impact of incorporating hall passes. So, it might not be possible every day to do 7,500 steps. So just give yourself 2 hall passes a week and say to yourself, this is my daily steps goal, but there's going to be 2 days every week where I give myself permission to not meet my steps target for whatever reason. Maybe you found yourself in back-to-back meetings and you just had no chance to get out for a walk, for example. So use the hall pass strategy to make yourself more likely to get that daily steps count.
Another health habit related movement that you talk about is taking a walk after a meal. Why that habit?
Okay, so I think that most people know that when it comes to blood glucose or blood sugar levels, which is, what happens in your body when you eat something or do certain things, particularly if you have like a big sugary, high carb snack, you're going to cause your blood glucose levels to spike and then crash. And you will have experienced this crash if you've ever felt really tired or brain foggy or even hungry, like just after you've had a meal, sort of, typically about 30 minutes after you've had that kind of a meal. And, there's not many nutrition experts that would disagree that we need to try to keep our blood glucose levels as stable as possible. So any strategy that we can use that's going to help stabilize our blood glucose levels, particularly after we eat, is really, really good for managing our health and managing our energy. And so what researchers have looked at is what is the impact of after we have a meal, and let's just say that it is a meal that would normally spike our blood glucose levels, like a really big bowl of pasta is something that will typically spike most people's blood glucose levels, is what if we actually move after that meal? And they've looked at all sorts of movement patterns, like moving straight after the meal, moving for 1 minute versus 10 minutes versus an hour. And what they found is that on average, the best thing we can do after we've eaten is about half an hour or so after we've eaten, just have some gentle movement incorporated into your day for, about 10 minutes. So if you aim after, say, your lunch or your dinner, about half an hour afterwards, just to go for a 10-minute leisurely walk around the block, you will significantly increase the chance of your blood glucose levels staying pretty stable. And you'll significantly decrease any spike that was going to happen.
I've actually experimented with this, and it's true. So there was a period a couple years ago where I was using a continuous glucose monitor, and I heard about this research about taking a walk after you eat can help reduce blood glucose spikes, particularly if you eat a high-carb meal. And it's true. If I didn't take the walk and I ate a carby, sugary meal, my blood sugar would go up to 140, 150. But then if I waited 30 minutes, it was interesting. I had to wait 30. If I did it right after I ate, if I did the walk, what would happen, the spike would just be delayed. Because I think what happens is your body, it takes about half an hour, 45 minutes for your body to start breaking down the carbs into glucose. And so if you do it too early, all it's going to do is just going to delay that glucose spikes. But if you time it so that you do the movement right when your glucose is spiking, your body's digested and sending the glucose to the different parts of your body, you move your muscles, and your muscles are just basically vacuums for glucose. Like your muscles run on glucose. And so you get those vacuums going by moving your body. It just sucks up that glucose. And if I took a walk 30 to 45 minutes after I ate, the glucose monitor would just be up to 120. It wouldn't be as high. So It does work. It is really powerful.
It totally does. And I love that you've mentioned continuous glucose monitors, which for those who haven't heard of CGMs, if you imagine something that's about the size of a ping pong ball, flattened and stuck to your tricep with a little needle that pierces your skin, it's basically a way of getting a continuous read on what your blood glucose levels are doing. They typically last for a couple of weeks and they sync with an app on your phone. And I've experimented with them at different times over the last few years. And I find that it is such a great tool for actually changing your behavior because you've got the data right there in front of you. There's no, oh, well, Amantha said this or research said this, but is it going to work for me? You can see the data. And when you can actually see how the inside of your body is responding to different tactics or experiments that you're trying, you're much more likely to keep going with those experiments when you can see, oh, they're actually working for me.
What about just making a regular workout part of your routine? Any advice there?
Oh, look, definitely a regular workout is a great thing. And what we overestimate is how long we have to spend working out. So there's been some great research into not just HIIT training, which I think we all know is, high intensity interval training, but what is called re-HIIT training, which is basically boiled down to shorter and less frequent bursts of all-out intensive exercise. So what some research from McMaster's University found is that the smallest, if you like, minimum viable dose of exercise that we can do to get massive benefits for our cardiovascular health is just a 40-second micro workout where you do a little warm up, get your body warm for 2 or 3 minutes, then do an all out 40-second sprint. It might be sprinting around the block for 40 seconds or doing a sprint on an exercise bike and then doing a cool down. And you can get the same kind of gains from a micro workout or re-HIIT workout as you can from going for like a 40-minute, 45-minute jog. It's absolutely amazing. And for anyone that is saying, I don't have time to exercise, well, all you need is 40 seconds and you will get some amazing benefits from that.
Let's talk about nutrition habits. What hijackers frequently get in the way of sticking to nutrition habits?
I would say that environmental hijackers are the biggest ones here. Like if you think about what is in your fridge and what is in your pantry and how much of that is the food that you want to be consuming more of versus food that you think that you should be consuming less of, like quite often there's a lot of food that we do want to be consuming less of that are at eye level in plain view whenever we go to make a food decision. So I would say environmental hijackers, if we can change the physical environment that we're living in and working in to make it really easy and just natural to select the thing that we want to be eating more of, like that will go a huge way to having healthier habits when it comes to nutrition.
And yeah, so you have specific habits in this environmental framework that you talk about that people can use to reduce the temptation to sabotage your diet. So the big one is to reduce the amount of hyperpalatable foods. So like the really tasty Oreos, Doritos,
Yes.
And then the ultra processed foods, which are typically hyperpalatable as well.
Yes.
And just keep those out of the kitchen as much
Definitely.
as you can.
Definitely.
We've had a guest on the podcast talk about the microbiome, the gut microbiome, and how it affects everything about health from your weight to mood to sleep. And to support your gut microbiome, you recommend that instead of taking a probiotic, people eat the probiotics. So how can they do that and make it a habit?
Yeah, so eating probiotics. So this is all about eating fermented food, like things like kefir, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, and, yogurt is probably the most easily accessible, palatable probiotic that you can eat. And so, certainly what Professor Tim Spector from the UK recommends is, ideally having some fermented food, eating your probiotics just in small amounts, 4 or 5 times a day. So, you might have a couple of tablespoons of yogurt with your breakfast, for example, maybe like a little bit of kimchi or sauerkraut, just as like a little side. Again, a couple of tablespoons is all you need with your dinner. So just, having small doses throughout the day is one of the best ways to improve gut health.
Yeah, what I started doing a while back ago, is I have some kimchi with my eggs at breakfast. And it's not very much. I get there's a little bag and I just scoop out like a serving of it. Not even a serving, just like a spoonful of it. And I got to eat that. And the other one is I eat yogurt. I eat Greek yogurt for a snack and probably get all the probiotics I need just making those really small changes.
Yes, and it's far cheaper than getting expensive probiotics from the chemist.
Correct. This is true. So if someone is listening to this episode and they're feeling overwhelmed by the health habits they want to implement, what do you think is the smallest habit you'd have them start with tomorrow to build some momentum?
I would come back to environmental hijackers. I would think about what is the behavior that you're trying to change and think about your environment, your physical environment at home and work and any other places where you spend a lot of time, and think about what is one change you can make to your environment to make it easier to do the thing that you're trying to do more of, or to make it harder to do the thing that you're trying to do less of.
I love it. Well, Amantha, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Well, they can go to amantha.com, or they can check out the Health Habit book to learn more about this. And I host a podcast called How I Work, where I talk about different rituals and strategies that some of the world's most successful people use to get more out of their day.
Well, fantastic. Amantha Imber, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Brett.
My guest was Amantha Imber. She's the author of the book, The Health Habit. It's available on Amazon.com. You can find more information about her work at her website, Amantha.com. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/healthhabit, where you find links to resources when we delve deeper into this topic. Well, that wraps up another edition of the AoM Podcast. Make sure to check out our website at artofmanliness.com, where you find our podcast archives. And while you're there, sign up for our newsletter. We got a daily option and a weekly option. They're both free. It's the best way to stay on top of what's going on at AoM. And if you haven't done so already, I'd appreciate it if you take 1 minute to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps out a lot. And if you've done that already, thank you. Please consider sharing the show with a friend or family member who you think gets something out of it. As always, thank you for the continued support. Until next time, it's Brett McKay. Remind time to listen to the AoM Podcast, but put what you've heard into action.